Hi, this is Chris with Clever Unicorn Games and the Unicorn Collective, back with another interview. Today I have designer Scott James with me. How are you doing today, Scott?
Hello, I'm doing very well, thank you. And yourself?
Yeah, not too bad. What is it that you like to do with your spare time, Scott, when you're not creating or playing games?
I have a bit of an odd hobby, which actually might not be that odd. I think it's become a bit more common recently. But urban exploration is it's exploring and photographing abandoned buildings.
Oh, not jumping off roofs for parkour.
I'm not quite athletic enough for that. But yeah, it's finding disused buildings, abandoned buildings, stuff like that. Roaming around, checking them out, taking photographs. It's it's like my thrill hobby.
What is your favorite board game?
This does change, but currently my favorite board game is Tiny Towns, uh, by Peter McPherson. It's it's probably the combination of challenging slash frustrating and satisfying is just so so rewarding to me. Like I'm a bit of a perfectionist. So when you see all the like different buildings that you can build laid out, and you've got your tiny grid, and you're like, right, I've got a plan, and you work out how you like, I'm going to put this here, put this here, put this here, and then the whole plan falls apart because it's reliant on other people's choices as well, and you've got to make the most of the situation. And I just can't get enough of it.
I've not played it yet. I've seen lots of people, I've spoken to people that have mentioned it, but I've just not played it yet. I'm
Yeah,
probably going to have to try and get a copy and give it a go
yeah,
because
yeah.
it does sound really
I'd
interesting.
recommend it. It's very cool. There's great aesthetic to it as well, like um the gameplay, like the graphic design for the gameplay, is really minimalistic, which again appeals to me as a graphic designer. Um, it's it uses colored cubes, again another plus for me. But it also has a really nice, once you put all the raw materials to build a building, you've got really nice wooden building tokens, and they're unique for each type. So it starts off looking really abstract, and it ends up looking really cool. And the artwork for it is really nice. It's like anthropomorphic animals, like little cute animals living in a town. So it's like it's really well done.
What kind of games or a game in particular inspired you to start creating games yourself?
Um, that's that's interesting because I mean I've got like a few different points at which I started designing games. So the very first game I started designing was a miniatures war game, which was I guess inspired by Fallout because it was post-apocalyptic miniatures game, and it kind of developed from 40K, which is a lot of people's kind of first exposure to miniature wargaming. But it developed a lot from there. But then I consider that's a little bit separate from my board game design, which came about 3 years ago, I think. I don't know if I don't know if there was a specific game that kind of inspired it. Like I've always been fairly creative. I've always been trying to make things, and as I moved away from miniature gaming and more towards board gaming, I wanted to make my own. So I took a few ideas and kind of started fleshing them out. Some of them worked, some of them absolutely didn't. Um, but it's on one of the groups, like board gaming groups at the moment. There's a confessions that would get your board gaming card revoked, or board game designer card revoked. And mine was I started designing games before I even really started playing them, which is a bit of a strange one. To this day, I've still never played some of the like modern classics. Like I've never played Catan. Um, I've realised that there's more people out there now that haven't played it, but to begin with, I felt like a bit of a fraud because I was like, oh, I haven't played these games that everyone's saying like maybe I should play them. Um, and now I've gone out and I've played a lot of stuff, but there's still a few kind of like I feel I should probably get around to playing those.
Yeah, there's some out there that some would say are, you know, needed, but it's really interesting coming from a point of view of not playing games before designing it. We had a discussion with another design. And I said, where do you draw your, if you've not played these games before, where do you draw your inspiration to start making the game? I mean, what was it, what did you start with when you first came up with that game before you'd really played any other games? What was it that in your head you went, I want to do this? Where did what was the mechanic of the game, first of all, with that first game you created?
The very first game was like a gladiatorial combat game, which I just made. It was made purely out of cards, mostly because I guess I took inspiration from card games. Like it was combat, so I kind of went to the card games that I played. That was one of the ones that didn't really work. It was interesting, but I just felt like there wasn't enough space for it to develop, and I think it required a lot of work to make each deck individual, which in turn required a lot of balance, which was kind of out my scope as a first-time designer. So I did kind of put that to one side after I played it a few times. I was like, yeah, this works as a game, but I don't really feel like I have enough influence in it, which kind of led me to then make something that I could quantify. After a few, I made Swatch, which as an abstract game is something that I could math out a lot of the balance, what I needed for the cards.
So, recently you launched your first Kickstarter, Swatch, which is really interesting, abstract art and colourful game.
Yeah.
But it didn't do as well as you'd hoped, and you've decided to cancel and rethink. What do you think was the reason it didn't do as well as you thought this time round?
I think it was a case of how I sold the game, not how I sold it to potential backers. I think is probably the best way to put it. Is the game itself? I'm happy with. It's reviewed very well, which I was interested to see how it went because it's my first design. I've done a lot of playtesting over the last 2 years. But there's always going to be a slight bias in that I think people who don't like it will say less than people who do. So you get like a little bit of a positive feedback. So I was interested to see how reviews came out. They came out like majority positive, and they recognised like the design things that I wanted in it. Happy with the game, but I feel like the campaign page didn't put it across as a product as well as it did a game, and I think ultimately that's what a Kickstarter is. So I had a bit of an unfortunate timing thing with lockdown delaying my house purchase. So I was moving house, redecorating a house in the weeks leading up to the Kickstarter launch. And I was kind of in that point where I was like, I don't know if I should delay the launch slightly to give me a bit more time to prepare. But I thought, I've told everyone the date, like all the reviewers have got it in their schedule. I'll go ahead. I should have asked myself the question: would I rather delay the launch? And obviously, there's a bit of a misfortune in that you have to communicate with everyone. Oh, yeah, sorry, I'm going to have to put it back. But I should have asked myself: do I want to do that, or do I want to have to cancel and relaunch? And the answer always would have been delay it. But I feel like I'd got it in my head, and that's one of my first-time designer errors, I think. So yeah, the campaign page just didn't show off the game as a product enough. So that's what I'm working on now. It's also given me an idea of how many people are interested. As an abstract game, although there's a theme to it, it's an abstract theme as well. Mixing color schemes, that kind of thing. It's not the artwork doesn't grab people. If people are interested in that kind of thing, then they'll think, oh, that's really neat, that's cool. And a lot of people have said, I love the clean design and love the theme. But it's from people who appreciate that and not a random person looking for a cool game. So I have to adjust my expectations for like scale of the project, I think, to match that. So yeah, that's what I'm doing at the moment, getting new quotes for like smaller print runs, but with the potential to grow, depending on how well it does. I think that's the main things, really.
Have you ever played a game that you just didn't like? You don't have to name it, but what was the theme or the mechanic or just what was it that put you off the game completely?
I'm quite easy to please. There's not many games that I've played where I've just gone, I don't know. I mean, okay, I've played a lot of prototype games, which definitely aren't at all resembling a game. But that's what happens, running a playtest, like running a playtest group and being a designer and stuff like that. But published games, there's been two. One of them I won't name because I outright don't like it. The other I want to name because it's an interesting thing for me. The first one I played at Board Game Cafe. It was a cooperative game, which I don't tend to play a lot of. It was a solo/cooperative. And both of us who were playing it had never played it before. The rulebook was not good, and that kind of took away most of our enjoyment. We had to refer to the front and the back because the solo and the co-op rules were on separate sides of the rulebook, so you had to like flip it over or something, I think. But the co-op setup always referred to the solo setup. So it said, "Oh, set up like the solo game, except replace step this and this with this instead." So then I had to go back to the solo thing, read the setup, but then I was like, "Oh wait, what step did I have to replace?" You have to turn it. Look, oh, step 3. Go back. Oh, step 3. And it was so much work just to do an alternate setup, which they could have just copied and just changed it. So that kind of annoyed us. We realized that we'd accidentally put a load of expansion cards in because the bit that said remove all the cards with the expansion symbols, and then it showed you like 4 symbols. They weren't all the symbols that you had to remove. You actually had to remove all cards with symbols in the top right corner, but it didn't tell you that. So we had to then set it up again, and then after that we were playing it, and we just never felt challenged. We never felt like there was a point where we had to make a bad decision. Like there was a card in it that when it comes out, you have to choose one of 3 effects, and they're all negative effects. But there was always a point where one of them didn't make an impact to us. So if one of them was like, "Oh, discard the last 2 cards that you've played," we were like, "Well, actually, that doesn't really matter. That doesn't affect our progress. So we just do that." Or discard a couple of cards off the top of the deck. And we're like, "Well, we're not bothered about that. We've got plenty." So yeah, it felt like there was never really a difficult decision to make. So it was a bit of a flat experience. And the rulebook, I think, set us at that point where we were already kind of like in a negative mindset for it.
And rulebooks are easy to say, yes, that's a bad book, but it's so hard to get a rule book right. It's one of those things with
Absolutely.
a rule book, you're looking at it and you're thinking, yeah, I understand that perfectly, so that's great. And some of the worst ones, that's what the designer's done
Yeah.
without consulting anybody else, because you've got to realize that in your own head, of course it works. You made it up. You know exactly how it works. Have
Yeah.
you have
It
you
makes
given
sense to
that rule
you.
book to somebody else to check to make sure they know how it works? And I think a lot of these rule books they haven't done that, but mainly because
Yeah.
they didn't know rather than
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the case. Like I've done blind playtesting with my rules, and luckily as well, I know a good rulebook editor who went over Swatch with me.
Is it David?
It's David. Yeah,
Shout out to David Digby.
David Digby, not only the editor of my rulebook, but also the designer of the solo mode. It's just he's very good in both those regards. So when I knew that I wanted to tackle both of them, I knew who to call. But the other game that is one that I really want to like is Splendor. I I really like abstract games, like theme. Unless it's a theme that really appeals to me, theme I don't really care about the theme. Century Spice Road, I mean, that's a pasted on theme at the best of it. I don't mind. I love pushing cubes around. So Splendor, again, the theme doesn't bother me. It's kind of like it's very similar to what I designed in Swatch. Like it's trying to be your most efficient, trying to like plan a few turns ahead. But every time I've played it, I've just felt a bit flat. I've just not enjoyed it as much as I expected. At first, I thought, oh, I played it 2 player, so maybe it's because you get more interaction with 3 and 4 player. I played it online with 3 and 4 player, but with some AI, and I finished the game. I was like, oh, I won. But I didn't feel like satisfied. So I was like, maybe it's just because I was playing against AI. So I'm going to play it once more. I'm going to play it with 3 or 4 players, all human. And if I don't like it, then I'll admit defeat. But it's one of those games that I really want to like because I know that I should. It's my thing on paper.
Yeah, no, that's I'm probably with you there. I've played Splendor quite a few times, and yeah, it doesn't jump out and grab you. It's a very by the numbers sort of game.
Hmm.
You know, it's enjoyable. I've got a friend that loves it, absolutely loves it, and will play it whenever he can. Yeah, but for me, it just I think it's probably because there's just not enough in it for me.
Yeah, yeah, I know what you mean actually. I feel like I want there to be a bit of I guess, a bit of a learning curve to it. But it's kind of like what you see is what you get. Is how I feel. Like once you realise that there is a bit of strategy to it, but once you know that, that's it. I
Yeah,
think there's because I one there's playing it for the first time or the second time, and then there's playing it after you played it a couple of times, and that's kind of like that's the progression you get.
saying that, it's not one that I wouldn't play. If somebody said, "Do you want to play Splendor?" It's probably I'd play it. I mean, it's not
It's
the point.
inoffensive.
Yeah, it's inoffensive. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll play it. It's like I say, it's a bit long for what it is, but it's still it's not unenjoyable. It doesn't set your world on fire, but playing with people isn't unenjoyable.
yeah. You don't come
It's a
out of it and
weird
go,
one,
"Oh
isn't
God, that was awful." Yeah, it's enjoyable, but I guess I just expected to enjoy it more.
it? Why is it that you make games? What is it that drives you to make games?
I always have to be doing something, and I'm the kind of person that what I'm doing isn't kind of quantified unless I end up with something at the end. Um, it's impossible for me to sit around and not do nothing, but like I always have to be doing 2 things at once. Like I can't sit and watch TV anymore. I have to be doing something at the same time. Um, yeah, I mean, I enjoy everything that I do that's extracurricular, but I always want a goal in mind. I know there's lots of hobby designers out there who design games for the process and for the enjoyment, and then they consider a game done and then move on. I think I've always been oriented towards like if I'm going to design something, I want it to be published, and whether that's published for free, self-published, or like getting it signed, which is not something I've really considered that much because I enjoy the process of self-publishing quite a lot. Like it's a crossover of skills that I enjoy all of them. But yeah, I always want to be able to look at something and go, "This is done and this is out there." So it's a bit of a strange one, really.
How has the state of the world at present affected how you're making games?
Um, I mean, one thing I'm really missing my playtesting group. We met every fortnight at the Ludicrous, which is our local board game cafe in Croydon. And over the past year, we'd built up like a great community. We doubled the amount of times that we met because we had so many people joining, and we've had like a really good group of core members who returned. There's some great games in there as well. And we didn't quite make the switch to digital playtesting. A few people just didn't get on with TTS. A few people didn't like really feel comfortable with joining Discord. So it's not really continued over lockdown, and I think that's affected me quite a bit in not just because I don't get to play test games, but like the social aspect as well. I moved down to London fairly recently, so I haven't built up like this big core social group that I had, before I moved down. So that was quite a big social output for me. But luckily, we've got loads of virtual playtesting groups, so I can chat to like-minded designers and players. And I mean, like we spoke for what, about 45 minutes before we even got this
Yes, we did.
interview started. Just chatting about everything, and yeah, that's the kind of thing that I miss. I feel like I'm still getting playtesting done, just virtually mostly.
What is one piece of advice that you would give to a new designer just thinking they have an idea in their head and they want to start making a board game? What advice would you give to them from what you've learned so far?
One Piece. Oof. That is difficult. How can I keep it to one?
You don't have to. You can give multiple if you want.
All right, I've got a few really short ones. You don't have to trademark your game.
Yes.
You don't have to hide it away for fear of people stealing your ideas. Um, that's something that I luckily quickly overcame because I saw the same question being asked in online forums. But the overwhelming answer is usually, not to be harsh, but your game's probably not unique. Very few games are. And also, if someone wanted to steal your game, it would still take an awful lot of work to get it to being published. There's lots of ideas. There's not as many well executed games. So don't be afraid about putting your game out there, because the more you put it out there, the more people will see it, the more people will help you.
Yep.
And that's the thing. Designers, I would say 95% of designers are doing it for the same reason. Like they love games, they love designing games, and they will help you. Um, I think my other bit would be just make it. It's probably bad, but do it anyway. Um, you'll never know until you actually play it, and maybe it's bad, and maybe like you'll reiterate and develop it. Maybe it's still bad, but it doesn't, like, that's a valuable part of the process, I think. I mean, as We're Not Wizards famously said, make something awful. Your first blog, your first game will be awful, but you've got to make that awful thing to get to the next one.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, that's amazing. Especially the whole copywriting thing. No point whatsoever. I've said this to numerous people as well when they've said, is it okay to give this game or this rule book to somebody to check for me? It's like, yes, of course it is. Nobody's going to
Absolutely.
steal it. If they do steal it, it's like you say, it's going to take a lot of work for them to get it to where they need to publish it, and it's not going to be anything like where you take yours to. So much changes in the
Yeah,
process of a game that
that's
they can take
absolutely
that
it.
core idea, but what they come out with at the end is not going to be anything like what you've done. You know,
Yeah,
so yeah, there's no reason to and yeah, there's so many games out there now, thousands and thousands of games with hundreds of different mechanic combinations that your game 99% of the time will already be out there in some form. The mechanics that you come up with will be out there implemented in some form.
yeah,
So in a way, you're already using mechanics that have previously been used. What you have to do is try and raise them slightly above what's come before.
yeah.
That's all you're
Design and
trying to do.
development are
Exactly.
two completely separate things, which at first you don't understand, and until you start playtesting other people's games as well, because you realize that they've designed something, you're helping develop it, and it is a very different process. Like, I've designed games which have then, once I started developing them, became completely different games. Swatch didn't start out as it was. Like, it had maybe a couple of things in common, but it started out as a very different game that um, I focused in on the things that worked about it and carried on developing it down that point. I could have took any other aspect of it and followed that route, and it would have been a completely different game.
Well, thank you very much for coming and speaking to me today, Scott. This has been brilliant.
No, thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it. Uh, even this little story time as well.
Yeah, the story will be extra to this video. You can go and find it now. I'll put a link to it in this video. But it is an interesting story. But don't go and watch it if you're easily scared.